thanks for being here. Thank you to ISAP, the Student Association, for the opportunity. How lucky am I, how lucky are we to be able to share our ideas in this cool building, in this cool room with technology. So grateful for that. Yeah, and on a personal level, why am I doing this? Why did I decide to give this presentation? I've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months thinking about the answer to that question. I think it's an important question, and the best answer I've come up with is I'm doing this to get out of the basement. You have no idea how happy hearing those words would make my friend and mandolin teacher, Nick DeSebastian. As the story goes, I've been studying bluegrass music for a bunch of years now, and Nick's been my teacher for most of those years. And we got into this routine where at the end of every lesson, he would say to me, are you gonna get out of the basement? And even it got to the point where the first question he would ask me in the next lesson was, did you get out of the basement? And what he meant was, in the bluegrass tradition, we have this great songbook with all these methods, scales, and things that we need to learn. Most of us learn those things in the basement by themselves, but in order to make the music alive for yourself and also for other people, you have to get out of the basement and play music with people. And it occurs to me every so often that I think about analytical psychology a lot like I think about bluegrass music, which is, in order for me to make archetypal analytical psychology come alive, I need to get out of the basement and play what I've learned. So that's about as good as answer as I've come up with about what I'm trying to do here tonight. Yeah, so a little bit about where we're going. 10 chapters. I intend to do the first 5 chapters in the first section. We'll take a short break, maybe 10 minutes, and finish with the final 5 chapters. I think most of you know that this is my symbol paper. It's not the symbol paper exactly. I'd call it the highlights of my symbol paper. I had to cut out about 30%-ish in order to squeeze it into the format for tonight. But yeah, I'd like to keep it to 30 minutes in the first section and 30 minutes in the second section. I'm mostly concerned about engagement. So I'll make a promise to you that I'll keep this as engaging as I'm personally capable of. I have a couple ideas about how to do that. The first is this handout that I've given you all. There's images, 2, one on one side, one on the other. These images came to me in the writing of my symbol paper. I'd say I go to great lengths to describe what those images mean to me, and I thought it would be a fun, cool experiment to test if these images mean anything to you as you listen to my explanations. And if they don't, no problem. If you don't want to play the image experiment game, you could also use them as feedback forms. Maybe something resonates for you, or you hear something that's missing. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So please, I'd appreciate any feedback that you're willing to give me. Yeah, the other idea I have for engagement is the PowerPoint itself. So it's a heavily image-based PowerPoint. All the natural photography is mine. It comes from my personal collection. There's a series of images that are not mine. I hope those ones are obvious. Pictures of young and so forth, movie, billboard kind of stuff. I don't cite those images, the sourcing of those images directly in the presentation, but if you so choose or so wish, I can send you a citation sheet at the end if you're curious where I got these pictures from. Yeah, and so if the reading and the images and the experiment game are not enough to keep this engaging for you, my only other offer is we have beer and wine after the presentation. So you can hold on to that idea while you listen. And that's about it I have for the introduction. I recommend putting your proverbial seatbelt on, your proverbial thinking cap on. I plan to move at fairly brisk pace, hopefully not too fast. If you're anything like my two young boys, at some point someone is going to say to me, could you please slow down? And if that happens, we'll deal with that as it comes. But some of the rhythm is intentional. There's a lot of pictures, there's a lot of words. And I hope to take you on a trip to the mountains. So let's do it.
Coming around the corner, watch your hands again.
Okay.
Somewhere. Just keep walking, huh? Nice steps, there's no change your reading. See, it's a little bit like you go like, and then you have to play.
Okay. I didn't get any water. The discovery of a symbolic life. C.G. Jung and Eiger. Thank you, Greg. C.G. Jung tells the story of a mountain climber who had a dangerous dream.
I remember the case of a man who was inextricably involved in a number of shady affairs. He developed an almost morbid passion for dangerous mountain climbing as a sort of compensation. He was seeking to get above himself. In a dream one night, he saw himself stepping off the mountain into empty space. When he told me his dream, I instantly saw his danger and tried to emphasize the warning and persuade him to restrain himself. I even told him that the dream foreshadowed his death in a mountain accident in vain. 6 months later, he stepped off into space.
So Jung uses this anecdote as one example of several in Man and His Symbols to explain the compensatory power of dreams and the potentially dark images that arise from the unconscious in the night's realm. I've used this story of the dreaming mountain climber as a point of reference for my own state of consciousness as I've visited many mountains over the years. Since reading Man and His Symbols, I've often challenged myself to consider the possibility that my passion for climbing in the high mountains is a psychological compensation, much to the chagrin of the part of myself that doesn't want to be seen. The night before a big climb, I often fear being visited by a similarly terrible stepping off into empty space premonition. Ears millimeters from the cosmic speaker, actively listening for the slightest hint of a siren sound from the unconscious. I can't say how many times I began a glowing orange sunrise journey up a mountain, relieved that no chthonic image arrived in my sleep. It took me until only recently, while writing this symbol paper, to identify with what has become the most important line in Jung's dreaming climber anecdote for me. He was seeking to get above himself. And that line continues to sting with ever more truthful precision the more I learn about myself, my attitude toward mountain climbing, and the power of symbols. Absent of deathly visions in the night, to what extent have my own travels up and down mountainsides been an attempt, unconscious or otherwise, to get above myself? What is it about the mountain that unleashes these higher transcendental possibilities for those who enter its domain? To what extent is going up physically and topographically also going deep, psychologically and irrationally? To think how close I've come to the tragic ending of Jung's Patient fills me with a kind of discomfort that only uncomfortable psychological truths provide.
A mountain guide watched him and a friend letting themselves down on a rope in a difficult place. The friend had found a temporary foothold on a ledge, and the dreamer was following him down. Suddenly, he let go of the rope, according to the guide, as if he were jumping into the air. He fell upon his friend, and both went down and were killed.
So in September of 2020, I climbed the normal route on the Eiger in Grindelwald, Switzerland's Berner Oberland region. That was the video that we just watched. I climbed with a veteran Swiss mountain guide. We'll call him FG for the purposes of this presentation. FG is well known in central Switzerland, especially in Grindelwald, not only for his climbing prowess and guiding reputation, but he's the coach and ski instructor for the Swiss and US junior national ski teams as well. So I was in good company. And while FG's character plays a minor role here, his wisdom in the high alpine was central to my experience on the Eiger, and therefore important for me to mention at the beginning. It was FG's uncanny skill set to guide me at a critical moment during a relatively short abseil above the legendary North Face, a few hundred meters before the summit, that protected both our fates from the friends that perished in Jung's tale, one on a temporary foothold. I stood on that temporary foothold, and instead of careening down the mountainside, FG moved steadily and brought us both to safety. I've been transformed by the experience, to say the least. Chapter 2. Moving on mountains, a quaternal process. The act of climbing a mountain, like a game of chess, or perhaps like the stages of life itself, is a process, as seen with this simple diagram. These four aspects, the quaternity of the whole, I'm calling it, is an indication that the process of climbing a mountain is a closed container. When we're engaged in the process of climbing a mountain, properly related to the experience of these four aspects, our path is chosen. We must start on the ground before we ascend, and after we reach the highest point, we have to go down. As to the eternal question of why take part in this process at all, I offer a four-word answer for which all the themes within the essay are nested. I climb to feel. I've only recently understood the soulful aspects of feeling in the mountainscape as a central goal to the properly balanced climber's mission. So traveling into this unknown territory carries plenty of uncertainty, not unlike climbing a high peak for the first time. But casting aspersions, I can only offer that in attempting to deepen my understanding of the climbing on a high mountain symbol, I've been relentlessly led to the royal realm of felt experience. That place where I can be sure I'm putting the soul on top of my personal hierarchy of values. A numinous psychological peak, while humbly accepting how intimidating it is to enter this boundless space. Taking the view of the high mountain symbolically has also brought me closer to the realization that the drive towards climbing a mountain is necessarily compensatory due to an inferior function, like Jung's dreaming climber. No one escapes, I argue, this challenging reality, not even the masters of the territory. We, novices, guides, mountaineers, alpinists, together climb to feel something that we're purportedly unable to feel in more conspicuous, less dangerous places in our everyday lives off the mountain. As parents of our children or citizens subject to the socio-economic daily routine, we're rarely living as animated and intense as we do in the high alpine. It's also possible that the need to climb in the high mountains, as I've experienced it, is a modern day expression of the Fisher King's need to fish to assuage his wound. To explore this soulful realm, I refer to Robert A. Johnson's The Fisher King and the Handless Maiden, and his contention that these myths are rooted in the wounded feeling function. Jung helps map some of the psychological landscape traveled, and words from the masters of mountain climbing provide some further context. If in the crux moment on the Eiger I didn't choose to live, it's likely that I wouldn't have. The line was that close. Any closer and my Icarus wings would have melted. This is not to forget the heroics of my guide. His ability to understand the problem and solve it with swift and efficient movements goes above and beyond the typical responsibility of a mountain guide. He helped me during a moment of confusion, and that help has consolidated a series of lessons for me to consider. Regardless, on that day, I needed to hold on to my life with courage and strength. I chose to live. And despite some of the trauma the memories have caused, I know exactly what it feels like to choose to live in the face of its tragic opposite. Like an image in a fairy tale, I felt the tension of that burning choice in the pit of my stomach, fully embodied, never to be truly forgotten. This has been my experience of the high mountain. At one time, life-affirming, and another death-affirming. One relying on the other with equal measure, as if this tug-of-war is necessary to experience the high mountains fully, to remain alive even, soulfully balanced, whole, trying to stay on the serpentine path between life and death, sometimes irresponsibly slipping too close to the darkness of death, and other times overconfidently flying too close to the brightness of life. Jung describes this phenomenon as enantiodromia.
The grand plan on which the unconscious life of the psyche is constructed is so inaccessible to our understanding that we can never know what evil may be necessary in order to produce good by enantiodromia, and what good may very possibly lead to evil.
One night before I decided I'd write about this particular topic for my symbol paper, I had a powerful dream. I was in a feverish night sweat, reliving the haunting feelings above the Eiger Nordwand, rife with the alien nature of the dream world, formless images fraught with nightmarish colors like an oil-slicked amoeba in the deepest valley of the underworld. The dreamscape was guilt, shame, and regret, inhabited into one alchemical pool. There were no characters, there were no words. The dream was purely in the phenomenological realm of feeling. One guilty feeling followed by a shameful one, mixing together into a furious onslaught of oozing amorphous blackness. it was almost unbearable. Then, like a lightning bolt, I sat straight up in bed with the opening line of Dylan Thomas's masterpiece repeating like a mantra gong in my head. I hadn't read the poem in years, but I knew it well.
And death shall have no dominion. Dead men naked, they shall be one with the man in the wind and the west moon. When their bones are picked clean and the clean bones gone, they shall have stars at elbow and foot. Though they go mad, they shall be sane. Though they sink through the sea, they shall rise again. Though lovers be lost, love shall not, and death shall have no dominion. And death shall have no dominion. Under the windings of the sea, they lying long shall not die windily. Twisting on racks when sinews give way, strapped to a wheel, yet they shall not break. Faith in their hands shall snap in two, and the unicorn evils run them through. Split all ends up, they shan't crack, and death shall have no dominion. And death shall have no dominion. No more may gulls cry at their ears, or waves break loud on the seashores. Where blew a flower, may a flower no more lift its head to the blows of the rain. Though they be mad and dead as nails, heads of the characters hammer through daisies, break in the sun till the sun breaks down, and death shall have no dominion.
By holding me in the darkness, I think the dream doesn't want me to forget how close to the sun I came. The nature of the dark image, cocooned in difficult feelings, seems like a warning to pay closer attention. Yet, by delivering the message of Thomas's poem, awakening me from unconscious sleep into consciousness with a clear attitude and orientation to the Grim Reaper of all things, it's self-evident to me that I must continue to travel to the high mountains, but perhaps in a different way, by different methods. My work is clearly not done. Chapter 3. Complexes, a theory about the mountain climber's psyche. Psychologically, mountaineering is only half of the whole that helps us understand the psyche of those who travel in the high mountains. Alpinism, I argue here, is the other half. In my personal experience spending time in the mountaineering community over the last 25 years, many different countries, countless mountains, I can say with some level of certainty that mountaineers, unlike alpinists, are more likely to travel to the mountains to conquer them. Mountaineers use the language of power and dominion to express their scaling of the peak, their battle against the natural elements, and the usually unilateral do-or-die conquest of the summit. This focused attention on the power dynamic leaves little room for love and eros. Mountaineers are said to wrestle with the impossible. 2 minutes in the mountain climbing communities on any of the social media platforms is all anyone need to find evidence for the majority stake that adrenaline junkie, peak bagging mountaineers, one side and proud of it, claim in the global climbing population. Further, an overwhelming majority of these climbers are male. For example, if we look at successful summits of Everest since the first in 1953 by Norgay and Mallory, 8% on the world's highest point have been women. Regardless of gender differences among climbers, though, the paper maintains an emphasis on the male perspective of the high mountain, primarily because of my God-given biological maleness. This is not to say that I or anyone else in the mountaineering community, male or female, who considers the eros of alpinism, haven't also fell victim to the alluring hero's journey and subsequent victories of the mountaineer at some point during their travels. Without mountaineering, we may never reach the summit. Without the summit, we may never learn enough about the soul-developing possibilities. Indeed, it's a virtual certainty that anyone who dedicates time and energy learning how to move in the high mountains has sought summits like trophies to showcase to the world. The summit trophy, an always controversial chalice to hold above the head after a successful climb, especially in the eyes of those who don't climb, is an indelible part of the high mountain journey. Both alpinists and mountaineers, Eros and Dominion alike, aim for the summit. Similarly, both alpinists and mountaineers share an acceptance of risk that they will incontrovertibly face while journeying into the high mountains. It's this perceived risk climbers take that is often so offensive to the collective. Contrary to mountaineering, alpinism is the art and therefore the lifestyle of ideally safe and efficient movement in high mountainscapes in all seasons, using any and all techniques: skiing, trad climbing, rock climbing, alpine style, simul, hiking, camping, everything really. In this multifaceted approach, alpinists go to the mountains to discover the depths of what's possible for them as individuals, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. It's a very personal and subjective orientation to the high mountain. It's more anima than animus for the male climber, more anima's encounter than hero's journey. The mountain environment inherently teaches the alpinist where his blind spots are and what he needs to bring into consciousness to travel with more grace, perhaps even more safety. The alpinist looks at his faults especially close, forever learning how to embrace the frailties of the human condition with the most tender, motherly care. Alpinism isn't a lifestyle based on peak experience per se. An alpinist is more introverted, quieter, more interested in the subtle aspects of the craft. An alpinist considers climbing summits in the Karakoram or the Himalaya the natural way, without bottles of oxygen to assist them. Alpinists climb with less gear and generally aim to move through the terrain in less time, with less resistance than bulkier and slower mountaineers. If an alpinist achieves some level of fame and recognition in the collective, they're more likely to communicate the challenges of the mountains as much as the joys, the good, the bad, and in some cases even the horrible. The alpinist honors the mountain by loving the mountain. Perhaps it's the love of the mountain that makes death in her domain an acceptable consequence for the alpinist spirit, that virtuous acceptance of dying while doing what you love as an honorable way out of consciousness. From a strictly personal psychological perspective, I adopted the persona of the mountain climber during the first half of my life and was frequently hijacked by the mountaineer complex. I had a vague sense much of the time that something was out of balance, but lacked the ability to place any value on that feeling. I knew I had a passion for the high mountains, yet I was only able to connect infrequently, and even then, only momentarily, with the deeper, eros-laden aspects of simply being in nature's beauty while climbing. Unsurprisingly, this lopsided dynamic played out in other areas of my life off the mountain. I dreamt, but didn't analyze my dreams. I read novels and poetry, but didn't have a language for my soul. I wrote creatively, but only for magazines and newspapers, not for myself. I played music, but I rarely left the basement. I climbed a lot of mountains and brought this mountain-strong, war-envisaged orientation to many of my pursuits, among them graduate school and succeeding in a hyper-competitive startup corporation. I was living the masculine hero's journey unconsciously, and that's not to criticize myself for the path. It was instructive as much then as it is now in reflection. But as I arrive at midlife in my 44th year, as I stand here today, the symbolic view has helped me understand the various states of consciousness I've managed in relation to mountain experience in a less concretized, less rational way. I'm trying to learn how to walk a new ground now, find a new mythical summit to pursue, not too high and hopefully not too low, all the while identifying, to the degree that I have any influence whatsoever on the process, a new set of values to consider before the possibility of growth on the chosen summit. More love, less power perhaps, before I hopefully descend towards embodied wisdom. I'm starting to feel the archetypal patterns rather than read about them as intellectual constructs expressed by the great minds of analytical psychology in books. And I often feel like I'm finally finding my own voice. Chapter 4. Stage 1 starts on the ground. Few of us enter the high mountains. Even in the Alps, where we're surrounded by high mountains in all directions, most do not brave the territory. Most stay on the ground. On the ground, we're not on the mountain. On the ground, we can see the mountain in the distance, rising above us like a monument. As climbers look up at the mountain from the ground, they're fixated on the peak, the summit. It's always the highest point that commands the most attention. A developing young climber might be walking on the ground for what seems like an eternity, searching for which direction he ought to travel, learning about what he wants and what he doesn't want. Suddenly looking up for answers, and perhaps for the first time, a dark stone peak contrasted by a snowcap, glimmering in the bluebird sky, reaches through swirling cirrus clouds and snatches his soul, hypnotized. The ground of my life story starts on Monomoskoye Island, a southwestern bird sanctuary on the Cape Cod Peninsula of eastern Massachusetts in the northeast US, where the only geological features of any height are hills of moving sand dunes that change shape from season to season. We don't have mountains. We have ocean at the altitude of the oceans. Maybe because there are no mountains to speak of in the land of my formative years, the stone ranges reaching toward the heavens are so foreign and therefore mesmerizing for me. On a mountain, I'm definitely not at home. The lack of familiarity of place on the mountain forces me to consider my ground in the world and more directly who I am, where exactly my discomforts lie, and to what extent I can maintain a consistency of self in places where I've comparatively not spent much time. The mountains provide a lens through which I can view the other, as it were, that nebulous experience of something or someone that we're not, yet after closer examination, inextricably are. Jung explains anima mundi.
It is a structural element of the psyche we find everywhere and at all times, and it is that in which all individual psyches are identical with each other, and where they function as if they were the one undivided psyche the ancients called anima mundi, or the psyche.
In My Life at the Limit, Reinhold Messner, arguably the greatest high mountain climber in the history of the world, adds color to Jung by pointing out that it's the experience of our own deserts that fundamentally connect us to each other.
By going to places where I do not belong, I experience the art of living, orientation through disorientation. All the deserts of the world lie within us, after all.
So if we want to grow and heal on the path to wholeness, we're as much defined by who we aren't than who we are. It's trite, unfortunately, but also true that the presence of light can only be seen in the absence of dark. The ground wants us to travel to our personal deserts. The desert, that lifeless territory I've reliably found in the high mountains, connects me to my humanity. Chapter 5, Etymology of the Mountain, an abstraction with words. The word mountain comes from the Latin mons and montanus, and later the Old French, montagne, before the English used to speak this sentence. The Latin mons means that which is obtained from the mountains, marble, marble column, Metonymically, Mons is associated with mountain beasts, wild beasts, towering mass, a heap, a great quantity, and also generically as rock. Add montanus to Mons, and the Latin reveals a dwelling in the mountains, of or pertaining to a mountain, especially situated among or built in the mountains. These Latin roots provide no concrete description for the mountain, interestingly. There's no summit, there's no ground, no descent, no ascent. The Latin implies an animal quality, purely metaphorical. Interestingly, hundreds of years later, as we sit here, there's no universally accepted definition for the word mountain. I'll say it again. The word mountain means different things and nothing. The word mountain is inherently an abstraction. In Great Britain, as outlined in the Oxford English Dictionary, there's a distinction between hill and mountain. Any heights under 2,000 feet are generally called hills in Western Europe, and mountains are confined to the greater elevations of the Lake District or of North Wales and the Scottish Highlands. The same dictionary explains the hills-mountains dichotomy further in places like India and Pakistan, where the mountains are much bigger. The smaller ranges of 5,000 feet and as much as 10,000 feet are called hills, contrasted with the Himalayan ranges where many, if not most, mountains rise above 20,000 feet. In an elementary geology textbook even, the author admits that in no unclear terms, the general disagreement about a precise definition for the mountain among the scientific community.
The term mountain is very loosely used. It commonly means any unusual elevation. In New England and central New York, elevations of from 1 to 2,000 feet are called hills, but on the plains of Texas, a hill of a few hundred feet is called a mountain.
So collectively, we can't agree on what a mountain is precisely. I find that so strange. The mountain is at once a molehill and an Everest. Perhaps the physical shape of a mountain is not even necessary for the imagination to create a ground and a summit. These ethereal qualities of the mountain summon the archetypal level of analysis.
We must constantly bear in mind that what we mean by archetype is in itself irrepresentable, but has effects which make visualizations of it possible, namely, the archetypal images and ideas. We meet with similar situations in physics, though the smallest particles are themselves irrepresentable, but have effects from the nature of which we can build up a model. The archetypal image, the motif or mythologem, is a construction of this kind.
So I'm trying to propose that, like physics, organizing images to make the molecular level visible to the eye, the mountain creates images in our psyche so we can build models for our psychology. Obviously, we can easily visualize mountains. We see them everywhere. A picture of my 10-year-old son's fingers or some black brushstrokes on white paper are as much mountain as the pictures of the Eiger thus far in the presentation. In this regard, one could argue the mountain exists more at the psychological level of analysis than any other. The mountain exists in our unconscious more than our conscious realities. There's something fundamentally symbolic and archetypal about the mountain as a result. Perhaps our minds think of mountains before our eyes. Our souls feel mountains before we imagine them. And when climbers place their hands and feet on mountains, there's nothing more consciously real than the stone. Combine this conscious climbing with the unconscious image, and climbers experience the transcendental tension of the opposites in real time. Maybe we're so captivated by climbing mountains because climbing a mountain is to decisively and without exception stand consciously on our own 2 feet while simultaneously crossing over into the transcendent realm. Our souls are symbolically activated. I'm reminded of Anatoly Bukharev, the master Kazakh alpinist from the climb.
Mountains are not stadiums where I satisfy my ambition to achieve. They are the cathedrals where I practice my religion. I go to them as humans go to worship. From their lofty summits I view my past, dream of the future and, with an unusual acuity, am allowed to experience the present moment, my vision cleared, my strength renewed. In the mountains I celebrate creation. On each journey I am reborn.
I met Bukarev in 1997, right 1 year after the Everest disaster that Krakauer wrote about in Into Thin Air. And he was an angry man. It was very interesting.